BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I will be responding to the latest live stream about the Zodiac Killer on the French Wrecking Crew channel, responding to the new video from Paulscape72, as well as talking about some tactics that are used by true crime writers and theorists to deceive us. And I would like to get right into things. I would like to give a big shout out to Jerome, who runs the channel The French Wrecking Crew, and he follows a lot of different true crime cases, most notably Making a Murderer and the story of Stephen Avery and the murder of Teresa Halbach, but he is a close follower of the Zodiac Killer mystery as well. Jerome released a live stream on his channel, which you can watch in its entirety, and it's just over an hour long, and he lays out his theory in the Zodiac Killer mystery. The Zodiac was a serial killer that operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And I followed Jerome's content for some time, but this is truly the time when he just encapsulated everything into a single live stream, put everything into one episode, and he talked about what he genuinely thought about the Zodiac mystery. He's been following it since 2001, so over 20 years of observations that he has made. And one thing I noticed about Jerome is that he has closely followed Drew Beeson's channel as well as his book. I think I was watching an episode of the Zodcast once here on YouTube. That's the show hosted by Drew Beeson. And Jerome was the first person who sent Drew a photo of him holding his book. And Jerome has said a lot of praiseworthy things about Drew Beeson. And Drew Beeson is the guy who thinks that Don Cheney was the Zodiac Killer. Don Cheney was a friend of Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery, the man who needs no introduction. But Jerome said that he thought very highly of Drew's research and observations and theories, but he looked at the mystery in somewhat of a different way, and he thought it was really interesting when he discovered Drew's work because it was similar to his own observations, but Jerome, of course, had some things that were a little bit different. Firstly, Jerome believed that the Zodiac Killer of the 1960s was not a single person, but it was actually a team of 3 people. So you could use the term the Zodiacs, which is something that comes up from time to time here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. And yes, indeed, Don Cheney would have been one of the people who is listed as one of the Zodiacs, and Jerome was very suspicious about him since very early on, but I think it's rather interesting because a lot of people become suspicious about Donald Lee Cheney and the Zodiac Killer mystery because he appeared in the accompanying documentaries to the 2007 Fincher film. There were 2 documentaries that were also released. One is called This is the Zodiac Speaking, and the other one is called His Name Was Arthur Lee Allen. And Don Cheney is leaving all of these types of sketchy things that almost make him sound guilty, and he isn't, by he, I mean Drew Beeson is not the first person to kind of have this suspicious feeling about Don Cheney. Absolutely not. Even you guys in the comments section have talked about how Don Cheney's behavior has been rather suspicious. Even Tom Boyd of ZodiacKiller.com became suspicious of Don Cheney in the early 2000s and contacted the authorities about him. So lots of people have looked at Don Cheney over the years, but Jerome began to think that Don Cheney was one of the participants in the Zodiac Killer mystery. Another one was a friend named Sandy Panzarella, Santo Panzarella, but going by the nickname Sandy. And the third one is, well, I'm just going to say that the third person who came up in the discussion was named Ron Allen. Ron Allen was, of course, the brother of Arthur Lee Allen. And I want to be very clear about something. Ron Allen is currently alive. I am not accusing him of anything. And Jerome is also not directly accusing him of anything. And I don't know if he coordinated the release of his live stream with the release of the video from Paulscape72, but let's just say Paulscape72 has also made some comments about Ron Allen in the past. No one is directly accusing Ron Allen of anything personally or immediately. Let's just be clear about that. But what Jerome has said is that he thinks that there were 3 participants in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and that this was something where one person became vilified, and the person who became vilified was Arthur Lee Allen. And Arthur Lee Allen was more or less what has been since named the perfect patsy in a way. But one big thing that I noticed during Jerome's live stream is I hope that I understood this correctly. He said that he believed that the Lake Berryessa stabbing was not genuine Zodiac activity, and that was a copycat, that was somebody who perhaps learned about certain pieces of Zodiac information and committed the stabbing. And I thought this was really different than Drew Beeson's material, because Drew has more or less used Lake Berryessa as an anchor point in his particular theory, stating that, I mean, the first time I interviewed Drew Beeson, he said that 99% he thought that Don Cheney was the Lake Berryessa stabber, and that Lake Berryessa is the opportunity when we have the most to learn about the Zodiac killer, because this isn't just a glimpse that people had. I mean, like, say, for example, the Zodiac killer's first crime that was committed was the Lake Herman Road murders in December of 1968. And there were no witnesses of the actual killer leaving the crime scene or committing the murders. There were no survivors, so they couldn't tell the story of what happened. No witnesses, fair to say. Then we have the Blue Rock Springs shooting on July 4th of 1969, which saw the death of Darlene Ferrin and the shooting of Mike Michaud. Mike Michaud was able to see the Zodiac killer, but only in a profile view, and he was being shot at with bullets and blinded with a flashlight. He did not actually get a good look at the killer's face, but he did estimate that the perpetrator was around 5 feet 8 inches tall, 195 to 200 pounds, and maybe had reddish-brown curls in his hair. All right. Then you have the Lake Berryessa stabbing that takes place, and the perpetrator is described as very different. I mean, the hair color isn't so far off, but more or less, I think that maybe it's fair to say that the perpetrator was just reported to have been larger and taller than that of the Blue Rock Springs shooter, although they are about the same weight, though. I mean, maybe 200 pounds is acceptable for both of them, but, I mean, the perpetrator was estimated to have been about 4 inches taller than the Blue Rock Springs shooter. Now, Jerome could have made a strong observation there, but then we have the Stein murder, the Zodiac killer's final confirmed crime, on December 20th of 1968, and this is one where there were no survivors, but there are witnesses who actually saw the Zodiac killer leaving Paul Stein's taxi where Paul Stein was murdered, and he was estimated to have been 5 feet 8 inches tall. The weight isn't so far off. I mean, maybe they thought he was a little bit lighter at first, but overall, I think that the Zodiac killer was around 200 pounds, maybe 200 to 220 pounds. Stuff is within the ballpark there. But at Lake Berryessa, you actually have someone talking to the person. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard had a conversation with this individual. At Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac is wearing the mask, like the hooded costume, and he approached them and told the wild story about being an escaped convict. And the person who's been the loudest voice about Lake Berryessa being a copycat is mostly Thomas Henry Horan, the author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, although he's gone back and forth between stating that that was a copycat, and that guy was an active participant, and that there were multiple killers who were intentionally inserted. As stated, that's the book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, the Zodiac Killer Hoax Theory. And if I understood everything from watching Jerome's live stream, he doesn't believe that the Zodiac Killer mystery was a hoax. It wasn't someone writing letters taking credit for murders that he didn't commit. It's that 3 people were responsible for the planning and executing of these murders. And I've already listed 2 of them, Don Cheney and Sandy Panzarella, and that they were involved in this directly. Whereas when you have somebody such as Don Cheney, he does seem like someone who would have had the brain for a lot of these things. He was, as Drew Beeson has done a lot of the groundwork on him, and he was very intelligent but an underperformer in life. He was somebody who had a high IQ, but he was a job hopper. He was an educated person going to Cal Poly Pomona, but he was also someone who was known to have been very crude. He was very good with dealing with any type of mechanics, because he was a mechanical engineer. And the Zodiac Killer's creations, by that I mean the letters and the ciphers, were not exactly arbitrary, or they weren't exactly dumb creations. There is a lot of intelligence that went into the creation of the Zodiac Killer's persona. So I think that a lot of this stuff is in line with what Jerome is thinking. And again, if I've misstated anything, I would request you watch his live stream, and Jerome can also share any corrections he wants in the comment section down below. But Jerome zones in on a particular piece of evidence, looking at a card that was mailed by the Zodiac Killer, the famous dragon card that has Don Quixote and Sancho Panza on it, and it says your ass is a dragon. Don Quixote, okay, that's Don. Sancho Panza, that's Santo Panzarella, Sandy Panzarella, that is a direct reference to not Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, but Don Cheney and Santo Panzarella. And I mean, if anything, that makes you a little bit curious or suspicious, or you got that spine-tingling moment. Now, wait a second, are we on to something here? And the Zodiac Killer, though, gave away an enormous amount of information, though. But this is perhaps my biggest takeaway from Jerome's live stream, and that was that he made one of the boldest statements that is so honest, and that is that the Zodiac Killer is saying all of this stuff in his letters and the ciphers, and he is just using this as a giant tease. That's what the Zodiac Killer is doing, and I'm paraphrasing everything that Jerome was saying, but this is the main idea. The Zodiac Killer just giving teases to his identity. Look at the 408 cipher that was created by the Zodiac Killer when he is just saying that he's saying that Zodiac is saying that he's going to give his identity away, and he didn't. He said he was going to give away more things and clues about his identity. In the other ciphers, the 340 cipher was cracked, and it doesn't reveal anything at all about the Zodiac Killer's identity. They're just teases, and if anything, we might be holding out now on the Zodiac Killer's third cipher, the Z13, which is known as the My Name Is cipher, that maybe that could possibly have something, but it's really hard to say. But I think that that is a very valuable and insightful observation. The Zodiac is writing letters, and he's talking about how he's committing the murders, but he's not really giving away anything that would truly indicate or implicate any specific person. The Zodiac Killer is also creating the ciphers, which he claims could be decoded and reveal who he was. Yet he's not giving away any information that would implicate a specific person. And you might be thinking, well, of course he's not going to do that. He's not going to say something that would send him to jail. Well, lots of other killers have been caught that way by mailing in stuff that has incriminated them. I mean, you can think about BTK, Maury Travis, the St. Louis basement murderer. They did things involving communications that ultimately led to their downfall. Now, with the Zodiac Killer, I think the Zodiac had a lot of instincts. I think he was very lucky, and he was also reasonably good at committing crimes in a way in which he would not leave an enormous amount of evidence behind. Somebody was even talking about this on Facebook when he was saying that the reason why the Zodiac Killer wore a costume at Lake Berryessa was he more or less had a kill kit with him, and that he could just pass it off as a bag. When he's walking there, he's carrying a knife, the gun, pre-cut lengths of rope. Maybe even he had the navy blue windbreaker in his bag, because that would have been something that he wouldn't necessarily want people to see him handling. Even something like a backpack, they could possibly witness that. Oh, if somebody survived, they'd be saying, well, he was wearing this red backpack that had this logo on it. But if he's just carrying it all in the hooded costume itself, like using the Lake Berryessa hood as a bag to transport the kill kit, yeah, he could have done stuff like that. It's the very small details that show that the Zodiac is somewhat thoughtful and somewhat aware of what he's doing. And also, when it comes to the creation of the ciphers, they are solved. When they are solved, they really don't reveal anything. Now, there's a big dispute about this, because a lot of people believe that the Zodiac Killer would never put his real name into anything. And I'm really about, I'm 50-50 on it for a particular reason. And let's look at the Zodiac Killer's final two unconfirmed ciphers, the Z13 and the Z32. And I don't want to remain constantly neutral with everything, so I think that the Zodiac Killer would put his name into the Z13, but it would be like a secondary layer. It would be something where, okay, you're going to solve the cipher, and there wouldn't be anything real, any real piece of information or anything that would benefit you. Like, you wouldn't necessarily know who the killer is once you solve the Z13, but maybe, just maybe, if you connected two letters in a particular way, it would look like his initials. His name would be hidden in there in some type of second layer, secondary meaning. Part of me is just projecting my own story onto this one a little bit, and I'm just saying that's what I would do if I were creating some type of 13-character cipher that could incriminate me. But Inspector Mark Rowley from the Madeleine McCann case openly said, you cannot just put your mind into the mind of a perpetrator because they're not going to be thinking exactly like you. But one more time, I would invite everyone to visit Jerome's channel, The French Wrecking Crew, and to hear his presentation on his theory in the Zodiac killer mystery. Some challenge questions that I will throw to you guys would be, Number 1, do you think it's possible that the Zodiac Killer was a team of 3 people? Number 2, do you think it's possible that Lake Berryessa was a copycat killer? And number 3, do you believe that the Zodiac Killer is going to leave any incriminating evidence in the ciphers? And Jerome has been a longtime supporter of Black Box Online Radio. He has done a lot to share the episodes that come out, and he said some praiseworthy things about me and this channel on the French Wrecking Crew live stream, and I'm very thankful of that. And Jerome was even talking about the book Killer on a White Horse, and he has also promoted that one as well. Killer on a White Horse is the first book that I wrote, and there are 3 books now in the White Horse Killer saga: Killer on a White Horse, Down the Dark Lane, and White Horse Strong, and they are available on YouTube in audiobook format, and you can listen to them 100% for free. If you want to check those out, if you just want to pass some time during the week or on the weekend, I invite you to check out the White Horse Killer Saga, and one more time, you can visit the French Wrecking Crew and like and subscribe over there as well. Now, I said that Jerome was talking about a certain individual named Ron Allen, not accusing anyone directly, but he was talking about him. And Ron Allen is someone that came up during an interview that I did earlier this year for the interview series on Black Box Online Radio, and it was done with Paul Baroque-Banks, and there was an issue with my microphone during that interview, so what I did was I edited myself out, and I put Paul's responses into a presentation format, and it's called the Zodiac Killer's Architecture, because the Zodiac Killer was not only a serial killer, he also wrote letters and ciphers and greeting cards. I was talking to you guys about the ciphers just a second ago, but also about the Dragon card. Well, the Zodiac also mailed in other cards: the Halloween card, the Peek Through the Pines card, the 13-Hole Punch card. And on Paul's channel, PaulEscape72, he has released a video that's about 25 minutes long, talking about some of his observations. Paul is a landscape architect, and he has worked for 30 years in that profession. And when I had the opportunity to interview Paul, I was approaching it with an open mind, and I hope he understands that I'm just going to share the thought process that I had. And Paul's a landscape architect, and began to notice that it's almost as if the Zodiac Killer was creating things that seem to be somewhat in the design scheme of a landscape architect, or this is how a landscape architect would make certain things. Because the Zodiac didn't only do letters, ciphers, and greeting cards, he also made drawings, and particularly the bus bomb drawings. In the first episode that I did with Paul, where the presentation you can hear from Paul on this channel is called the Zodiac Killer's bus bomb diagram. But it's all in the playlist, The Zodiac Killer's Architecture. And as a landscape architect, Paul began to notice certain things. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I really thought that we were going to go into a dead end. I really try to give everybody a fair chance and to give different theorists the opportunity to share their observations about the Zodiac Killer mystery. But Paul was saying this, he's noticing that the similarities between the Zodiac Killer's drawings and landscape architecture. For example, the way that the cars and the bus are drawn, and then they have arrows, and they're on slight inclines, and there are other types of inclinations in the Zodiac's writing. And I was saying, well, that stuff is so simple. The arrows are just meant to show directions, and it's a bus bomb letter, and there's a drawing of the bus. But once I heard Paul's full presentation, I began to think, all right, maybe there's something there. And once I watched Paul's video on PaulEscape72, I was like, okay, now we're going somewhere. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper here on this channel, Ripper Wednesday, and I did a book discussion recently about Jack the Poet with Francis Thompson, Jack the Ripper. It's written by Simon Webb, and I had a very similar experience with that one, where when I first heard about Francis Thompson as the Jack the Ripper suspect, I was thinking, okay, this is going to be a dead end. I mean, you're talking about some poet from the 1800s that, as I was like, you're looking at interpretations of his poetry and such. I don't think that that's even a practical way to explore a serial killer mystery. But then I watched the interviews that were done, not by Simon Webb, but by another person who thinks that Francis Thompson was Jack the Ripper, Richard Patterson, and he has his own book out on the subject. And once I heard the full presentations, I was like, wow, all right, I understand you in a different context. And my feelings and experiences with Paul were rather similar because, again, I was thinking, okay, you're a landscape architect. Are you just seeing what you want to see? I mean, a lot of people get accused of this. Even Robert Graysmith, for example. When I was recently a guest on Ross Geraci's show, Planet X Filmworks, he was talking about how, okay, Graysmith was saying maybe the Zodiac was a cartoonist because Graysmith was a cartoonist and he could see how the ciphers were drawn in a particular way. But my ultimate response is, I invite you to go over to Paul's channel, Paulscape72, and watch his video on the Zodiac Killer's designs. Because he takes landscape architecture textbooks and technical drawing textbooks, and he lines them up and puts them on the screen, and then puts the Zodiac Killer's bus bomb diagrams on the screen. And he shows you actually how similar landscape architecture drawings are to the Zodiac Killer's drawings, like in the bus bomb diagram, for example. And I mean, there really are striking similarities, and somebody like Paul, who is a landscape architect, would notice this stuff immediately. But Paul's video isn't simply on that. He has also made other observations about the Zodiac Killer mystery, and I think one of the boldest claims that has been made by Paul Brookbanks is that he does not believe that the Zodiac Killer had a military background, and that's something that a lot of people would encounter with great, it's the desire to challenge. Say, for example, Michael Cole even wrote in the Zodiac Revisited trilogy, he believed wholeheartedly that the Zodiac Killer was ex-military, specifically either ex-Navy or ex-Air Force, and you also have maybe somebody like Drew Beeson who thinks that Don Cheney was the Zodiac, and Don Cheney was ex-Air Force as well, and countless other people have been promoting suspects who were either in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force. Arthur Lee Allen was ex-Navy, even initiated into the Golden Knights because of something he did in a submersible, and that's all documented in the book, The Allen Files by John Bowman. So I think that that's a claim that a lot of people would want to dispute with Paul about, but I mean, Paul has his own reasons. He has a right to share his theory, and mostly Paul said this during the interview that I did with him, but some of the same ideas are in the presentation on his channel, Paulscape72, when he's saying that the only real evidence that shows any type of military background is the wingwalker shoe prints at Lake Berryessa. I mean, wingwalkers are the type of shoe that would have been worn by somebody who was walking on the wings of an airplane. Wing walkers, yes, they were used in the military, but also they sold those things in surplus stores. And they're, the military surplus stores, all that means is that the Zodiac Killer acquired a pair of wingwalker shoes. That does not definitively mean that he was in some type of military-related profession. And even when we've talked before on this channel about how pilots and sailors use some of the language that the Zodiac was using in his letters, most notably Radiance, saying that the Zodiac Killer used the word radiance, saying that he was planting a bomb, and the location of the bomb concerned radiance and inches along the radiance. And who would be using that in their active vocabulary? Someone who was ex-military, a pilot, or a sailor. But I will say flat out, not commenting on anybody else's research right now, there are countless examples and professions of people who use radians, maybe not in daily conversation, but exposure to radians could happen from so many different things. Maybe from the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, as previously stated. Maybe he encountered that when he was studying landscape architecture at a university. And as I said in Paul's video, he also really zoned in on some other things. Who really would have had the time to design and compose the Zodiac Killer's persona? Would this be a married family man, or would this be somebody, say perhaps a university student, who would have had more flexibility in his schedule? Now, also, there's an issue of where were the Zodiac letters and ciphers created? Now, the letters are very sloppy, but the ciphers are very neat. Someone has put an enormous amount of time into making the ciphers look neat. And I shared an image recently from Vincent McConnell, who releases his own Zodiac observations on Facebook using Facebook Live, and he talked about how Well, if it's not a light table, he'll eat his shirt, something to that effect. And when you look at how the Zodiac's ciphers fit into a graph, or like a light table would have been very easy to use to make them look extremely neat when his natural handwriting was sloppy. And Paul has theorized that he could have had access to one on a university campus. And somebody even wrote into the comment section on Black Box Online Radio saying a lot of people are getting bogged down on this issue of the light table or graph paper. I mean, there are just countless places where you could have access to a light table or graph paper, as well as being able to make your own. If you truly wanted to, you could make your own with the right type of glass and the right type of flashlight. All right, point taken. But I think that what Paul is trying to say is somebody who was perhaps studying either architecture or landscape architecture or something like technical drawing at a university would perhaps have a place off in the corner where he could have created the ciphers and the diagrams and been able to do it relatively undisturbed. Now, also, another point that Paul brings up as somebody who was a landscape architect is that the Zodiac killer appears to have been someone who was able to draw very freely and effortlessly, even though his drawings are extremely simple. Like, he'll draw a bus which is not anything worthy of a grandmaster. It's a very rudimentary drawing of a bus. But he is drawing things that are almost done with ease. They're definitely freehand, but it shows that he has an extreme familiarity and comfort sense when he is making these types of sketches. This also could indicate that this is someone who was educated with landscape architecture or technical drawing or something of the sorts, maybe some other types of design, so to speak. So the Zodiac killer does have things that are reminiscent of design in other ways. Say, for example, all of his influences from comic books and theater and literature, and more or less I think it's safe to say that the Zodiac killer was using certain influences from comic books such as the Wheel of Death from the Tim Holt comics, the Symbol from Red Rider, and maybe even other things from literature. But that shows that he is paying attention to certain types of designs, and he is zoning in very closely on them. So, again, I invite you to check out the presentation from Paul Brookbanks available on the channel, Paulscape72, and you can also listen to his full presentation here on Black Box Online Radio in the playlist, The Zodiac Killer's Architecture. Next challenge question. Do you think anything that Paul has shared is going down the right path, or do you think that he is just completely out of it? He's just missing the mark? And as I said, Paul has made a lot of observations that aren't purely focused on landscape architecture and technical drawing. Instead, he has his own theories about the Zodiac killer mystery. What do you think, though, about the possibility of the Zodiac being a university student? Now, this is something that I entertained highly in the past, but over time, I began to think that the Zodiac was much closer to 35 rather than 25, but that's just me. I want to know what you guys think. Put your ideas on the comment section down below. In addition to that, you can also hit the like button and subscribe and go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. You have really helped the channel out a lot, as well as with helping find the source material for the shorts that are released on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, just on the YouTube Shorts page here, but also on my personal Facebook, Ned Dahan, and on Instagram, BlackBoxNet88. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery, another regular and consistent supporter, and I can't thank you enough. You two guys have been absolutely amazing for the longest time. And our next one on BuyMeACoffee.com comes to us from DB42069, who says, I really enjoy your content. Your enthusiasm and approach are great. Hey, I appreciate that, and that's one more time, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88. And the final one is going to come to us from CZ Guy, who actually left this on YouTube via the Super Thanks. You can also donate via the Super Thanks here on YouTube, and the C Guy just simply says thanks. And this was one that came in on the episode for the Sociopath Next Door. I did a bonus episode over the weekend for The Sociopath Next Door, which is a book by Dr. Martha Stout, and I was talking a lot about her observations about sociopathic behavior and sharing them with my own observations that I've made, talking about true crime cases over the year. And you can hear this at The Sociopath Next Door, a true crime book discussion here on Black Box Online Radio. And the final shout out is actually going to go to Dennis G, who has been helping a lot with finding the images for the show that you're seeing going by on the screen. Dennis, thank you so much. Also, I appreciate your regular and consistent support. Now, I said for the remainder of this episode that I was going to be talking to you guys about certain tactics that are used by true crime writers and theorists. And they are talking about their theories, like when they're talking about their observations on an unsolved mystery. And I'm really going to try and keep this focused on the Zodiac killer. And I just wanted to go through them step by step. And this really is the first time that I've ever talked about this stuff in such a succinct manner here on Black Box Online Radio. The first tactic that I've noticed from people is exporting. And exporting refers to language. They're just exporting an enormous amount of language, and you can't even quite understand what they're saying. Sometimes it's incoherent language. There'd be like, the Zodiac killer was this, this, and this, and then just rambles on for 3 pages of mangled language that you can't understand 90%, 10% maybe is very coherent, where it says, my suspect was this person, he worked this type of job, and then it just goes into ramblings. It might be say, my suspect was this person, he worked this type of job, Jenny liked to read, she was sitting over near the place where the sun set, the moon came up early that night, and it's just going through different ideas that are so out of control. And I get in a little bit of trouble for saying this sometimes, but some people who use this tactic of exporting do indeed have mental illnesses. I'm not referring to any specific person at all. It's just something that I've encountered once I begin to experience things. And yes, ultimately, somebody did contact me once and saying, hey, the person you've been talking to was my sister. She has schizophrenia. She's not supposed to be using my computer. Please disregard everything. And just stuff like that. But yeah, it's using the tactic of exporting. Not all people who use exporting are actually mentally ill. Instead, they're just exporting these large chunks of language that they expect other people to pick apart and try and make sense of. But if they're sharing their ideas in a confusing way, people can't truly challenge them because they need to spend a certain amount of time going through the different pieces of language, like, well, what is this person trying to say, before they can challenge them. It's a way of luring people in. This will bring us to the next point about how people will use deceptive tactics, and it is fragmenting. Fragmenting is when somebody never tells you the full story. They only share very small pieces of the story, and they can put it out in different ways, maybe in each video or in each chapter in the book. They're telling you a little bit about what they think, like, okay, this is how I learned the identity of the Zodiac killer, and this is one thing that helped me learn the Zodiac killer's identity. This is another thing that helped me learn the Zodiac killer's identity. But they'll never tell you everything all at once. Instead, they're just dropping little pieces or fragments of information that they expect you to stitch together. See, with exporting, they're putting out too much. There are too many words, and you have to sift through them and find what they're actually trying to say. With fragmenting, there are too few words, and you're just waiting for more, but both of them have the same end outcome. And that is that they want to pull you in. You want to be like, well, what's the ending to the story? Like, well, what really are you trying to say? I've already listened to you for like 15 videos, or I've already read 9 chapters in your book. Get to the point already, all right? And you just keep waiting and waiting and waiting. And one person who does this, who uses the concept of fragmenting, and I don't even think he would dispute this with me. I mean, he definitely would say he's not trying to be deceptive, and I'm not calling him deceptive, but his name is David Gold. David Gold is the author of the book My Dance with the Zodiac Killer, and his Zodiac Killer suspects are also a trio, but quite different than Jerome's. He has the 3 suspects, Frank Lee Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. And he also does not tell you everything in one single YouTube video. He has released over 100 videos on YouTube, and a lot of them are about the Zodiac Killer. He even released a video about techniques on regaining lost memories, which was very popular on his channel, and it concluded with how he learned the identity of the Zodiac killer. But I noticed that whenever people would ask him about something in the comments section, wait a second, David Gold, in this video you said this, but in a different video you said that, and his response was always the same. He's saying, you have to just watch my videos and get the information. I can't explain everything in the comments section on YouTube. There's not enough time, there's not enough space. You just have to watch my videos in order. And each video is going to have what? A fragment of the story, and when they're all put together, maybe you're supposed to get something. You should get the final answer, but I'm not necessarily sure if you would. And it goes so far beyond David Gold and so far beyond my dance with the Zodiac Killer. Instead, it is just about how people don't always tell you the truth. For example, I used to follow this YouTube channel called Marvelous Work and a Wonder, and again, I mean, they talked a lot about things like simulation theory, and I did 3 episodes on that because they would write these books and put it out for free. And they had a show called Coffee with Chris on the Marvelous Work and a Wonder channel, and I thought that their best observations had nothing to do with simulation theory or anything like that. I thought the best things they did were just talking about self-help and, okay, this is how you deal with people whom you don't like that much and so on. And, I mean, I would have much rather just heard an entire YouTube channel about that, but instead they would tell this story of how they learned the truth about human existence, but never give you the full thing. And it was all done with pure intent. Now, you don't know what happened to me back in 1987. And I'm going to tell you, but we have to get there first. You know, it's a way of pulling people in without giving the full pieces of information away. The next one that I would like to talk to you guys about is something called derailing. This is almost identical to something that I shared in the guide that I wrote, True Crime Teaches Us to Conquer Toxic People, which was part of the Black Box Online Radio membership available on BuyMeACoffee.com. And True Crime Teaches Us to Conquer Toxic People had something in it called buzzword hunting. But for the purposes of this discussion, I would like to call it derailing. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and it always seemed like they were talking to you, but they weren't exactly saying things that were on point? And that's why I use the term buzzword hunting. It's almost as if they pull random words out of the sentence and they're making irrelevant comments about them, but ultimately it leads to them talking in a confusing way. So they think that they won the argument because you don't understand what they're saying. And a very basic example that I use is, you might say something like, I like tomato soup. This is true, by the way. I like tomato soup, especially with grilled cheese sandwiches. I like tomato soup. Then somebody would say, there are other types of soup. And I'm like, well, that doesn't change the fact that I like tomato soup. And then they might say something to the effect of, well, do you like other types of soup? Yeah, sure. I like chicken soup sometimes, I guess, and maybe even with beef or something like that. Oh, so you don't only like tomato soup, you like other types of soup. Well, I also like tomato soup. You still haven't changed the fact. They are just talking about things in an irrelevant way, a way that is not important, but it sounds like they're debating you. It sounds like they are actually having a discussion with you, but really, they're just kind of lost in their own minds, because I knew somebody who would do this like to the nth degree. And I mean, he started out as a coworker and then became somebody that, I would hang out with for a little bit, and we don't talk anymore at all. And this is a big reason why, because I really began to notice that he was just sort of derailing every conversation into a way that he wanted to talk about things. Like if I made a comment about something, he would just start making irrelevant comments about that so he could slowly talk about anything in the way that he wanted, whether it was sports or politics or movies or books, just slowly trying to put things on his track so he could talk about it in the way that he wanted. And in the true crime world, people are going to use derailing because they're going to say things about a true crime mystery in an irrelevant way. Like, say, for example, this copycat theory with the Lake Berryessa stabbing. You might say that, all right, well, I don't believe that the Lake Berryessa stabbing was Zodiac activity. I'm not talking about any specific person or theory. But you might say that. I don't think that Lake Berryessa was actually the Zodiac. And then somebody would say, the Zodiac killer had 4 confirmed crimes: Lake Berryessa, Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and the Stein murder. You're like, well, wait, but I dispute that. Well, it seems pretty obvious that somebody committed the first 2 murders, the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting and the Stein murder. I mean, all of that fits. So why wouldn't Lake Berryessa fit? And you're like, wait a second, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. I'm disputing the fact. They're just always derailing the conversation from what they're actually supposed to be talking about. And the worst part is their information isn't wrong. It's not inaccurate. They're actually saying things like, well, yeah, there could be evidence that shows that the same killer committed crimes on numbers 1, 2, and 4, but you're disputing the 3rd crime. And they're not really on point, but instead they're making factual statements about things that are off topic and off base. And you will see that time and time again when people are sharing stuff in the comment section on YouTube. The last one that I would like to talk about is perhaps condescending. I mean, I think that's the best way to put it. I don't know if that is maybe I can think of a better word for it later on, but it's when people use condescending behavior. It's when they're always trying to maintain a sense of superiority. And they say that they have this true crime theory, and then it's always that their true crime theory is right because they are the best person. Not even that their suspect is the best match for the physical evidence. It's just because they are the best person. They're the smartest. They've spent the most time looking at this. They have interviewed the most people, or maybe even something to the effect of they are just superior to all of humanity in some way. And that's an extreme example. That's hyperbole. But some people are using this as a way to do that, where they're just going to be talking down to anyone that challenges them. And if someone's like, hey, wait a second, you made this comment, but then you've also made this comment, and these 2 things contradict. How do you explain that? And the simple response is, who are you to challenge me? You are no one. You don't have as much intelligence as I do. You don't have as many years of experience as I do. I know what I said, and I stand by it because I'm better than you, I'm smarter than you, I'm superior to you in some way, so I'm going to ignore everything you say just to prove a point. And, I mean, I don't think we need to talk any more about that. You guys kind of know what that type of rude behavior is. I will share one more thing, and this isn't exactly a deceptive tactic or even a tactic, period, that is used by people to either deceive people or to stall the conversation. Instead, I just want to talk about some of the motives that people have for exploring their true crime theories. And I've noticed in the Zodiac killer mystery, a lot of people are upset about something unrelated to the Zodiac case. So what they do is they find somebody and they use that person as a target for their own emotional stress, and it's almost like a distraction. Maybe we should call this one venting. And I wasn't even thinking of this as a deceptive tactic. And in some ways it's not, because they're not really lying to you. They might just be mistaken and confused. But they choose one person that they don't like that much, and then they just begin to attribute all of these terrible things to that person as a way to distract themselves from their own emotional stress in life, thinking that, okay, this person I know, I found, he was the Zodiac killer. He also murdered 5 school children in 1964. He also committed these crimes. He was also responsible for this and that. And there were just countless examples of people who accused the Zodiac of hundreds of murders. Hundreds and hundreds of murders. Maybe some of them are in the thousands when you look at all of the crimes that have been attributed to them as well. Say, for example, David Gold accuses the Anglin brothers and Frank Morris of causing a bridge collapse that could have killed like 200 people or something like that. And I'm not even joking. But when we look at this stuff piece by piece, I really just began to notice that people would choose somebody whom they think was a prolific serial killer. And then they started investigating other crimes and thinking, how can we reshape the evidence to make it fit our theory? And the fact that they've chosen somebody else, a real person, and then they just want to attribute all of these terrible things to that real person, when most likely their suspect was not the Zodiac killer. I mean, not everyone can be the Zodiac, right? But they definitely use this as a way of distracting themselves from their own problems in life. And I'm not saying that in any in any humorous way. I mean that wholeheartedly, because a lot of people explore true crime cases not because they want answers to the mystery. They're doing it because they want either respect or admiration, or they want to think that they're really good at this type of problem solving behavior and material, and just maybe really good at problem solving in general. They think that it's a special ability that they have and only they have. So what they do is they just start putting out even some of the wildest theories that you can imagine, and then they stand by them. Now, I wouldn't include David Gold in that discussion, absolutely not, because he openly states that his observations about the Zodiac case are not theories. As previously stated, he unlocks memories, and he claims that he remembers these conversations with Frank Morris. I'm just, calling a spade a spade. That's what he claims. But there are people out there who do say that they have encountered things through research, and it's almost like, all right, we've chosen the suspect. Now we're going to read about every crime under the sun or in the darkness and see how we can make the evidence fit. And if we can't make the evidence fit, well, then we'll just toss it away, toss it in the back of the cold case files and forget about it. But if we can't find a way to make this fit, and it's very simple stuff, like maybe the suspect is a pilot, and they'll be like, oh, well, he's a pilot and he flew to this country once and somebody was murdered in this country, therefore my suspect was the Zodiac killer and he also murdered somebody in another country. Just one example. But people do this all the time, and it's not even mental gymnastics. It's pattern seeking to get a desired result. And that's not a deceptive tactic. Instead, that's just some people who are a little bit confused. But what do you think about this segment here, as well as about the observations made by Paul and Jerome, and anything else that you've heard in this episode? I encourage you to put your ideas in the comment section down below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there's always BlackBoxNet88 over on Instagram. And there was a recent request that came from someone using the YouTube name TeeSpring, if I was going to talk more about my own original observations in the Zodiac Killer mystery. And I was going to devote this episode to that, but I have an old Black Box recording called Zodiac Killer, My Personal Theories. And I also shared a lot of my own ideas on a recent live stream that I did on Planet X Filmworks, hosted by Ross Geraci. And you can get that over on his channel. Please visit Planet X Filmworks as well. And that's all for me. Goodbye.